You know, I'm going to give you a history lesson.
We got some dumbass motherfuckers floating around this country.
Stop laughing! And when I do, start fucking.
Also, y'all did some nasty ass jokes on my ass, too.
Funny jokes and unfunny jokes come out of the same birth.
You fucking guys are unbelievable.
Why are you laughing?
Evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Why You Laughing, a history of comedy podcast. And today, I am pleased to introduce you to Martin Lawrence, another guy kind of similar to Robin Williams, although I was more aware of the impact that Robin Williams had, even when I was kind of young, as a fan in stand-up. But Martin Lawrence is a guy that, I knew him from Bad Boys and Big Mama's House and all that type of stuff. I wasn't until, the last few years when I would hear guys like Rogan and Chris Rock and stuff that we'll play later, where you hear a lot of comedians talk about the influence that Martin Lawrence had. And it's very interesting because his show, Martin, very influential. I grew up in the 90s, completely unaware of it. I didn't know it existed, just didn't hit my radar. And yet it influenced a lot of TV, a lot of... his stand-up influenced a lot of stand-ups, as we'll talk about. And so I thought it was an interesting topic to dive into because I didn't really know the impact he had. I knew he was a big movie star, but that's about where my knowledge ended up until, I'd say probably 4 or 5 years ago when I started hearing people talk about like Def Jam and the show Martin. And I think the comment that made me most curious to dive into a topic like this was I remember Louis J. Gomez a few years ago talking about shows like Seinfeld and Friends that were, super white. Like those are the two that come to mind in the 90s when people talk about there were no black cast members. Literally on Friends, people point to Aisha Tyler as being the one black person who ever appeared on the show. So those were, super white, I guess some people might have looked at them as snobby type shows. I think Seinfeld's humor transcends anything like that, but maybe not for everyone. But anyways, I'm getting off track. Louis J. Gomez, who grew up, poor, without a dad, and his mom was a prostitute and a heroin addict, he said he related a lot more to shows like Martin, and that's what he grew up watching. So I think it was just a different demographic than my, cornball white bread interests in the suburbs. Martin was hitting a different demographic, and I don't want to, get into it too much now because we got to start at the beginning as we always do. But basically, that's what I'm saying is Martin Lawrence was a hell of a lot more influential than I think I ever realized.
Oh, for sure. And if you listen to Rogan consistently, like every third episode, he'll talk about how hard it was to follow him.
I think that I shouldn't even say Lewis's comment. I think it's, having listened to Rogan over the years, the amount of times Martin Lawrence gets props for being just a destroyer, a guy people couldn't follow at the Comedy Cellar. And, I think when I was more, I don't know what the word is. Coherent when I was more aware and actually really looking into stand-up and things like that. That was kind of at the time where Martin Lawrence started to disappear, before the latest Bad Boys. I think the last thing he was really in prior to that, that had huge success anyways, was one of the Big Mama's House movies. And that just never did anything for me. So I didn't really pay much attention to Martin Lawrence's career. But yeah, people talk about him as an absolute destroyer in comedy and a guy who was super influential, like I said. Actually, before we start, I always have to say, blindmike.net. Have you gone there yet, folks? Make sure. If you want to subscribe to the Patreon, we're going to have more bonus content coming in 2023. We will do bonus episodes and mini episodes and all kind of things like that. So subscribe to the Patreon if you'd like to support us in that way, or if you want to support the show for free, that's easy, plain and simple. That's also at blindmike.net, where you can find the links to Apple, Spotify, YouTube, subscribe, share, all the things that you do to support podcasts. Do it for this one, if you'd be so kind.
We would much appreciate it.
Yes, it'd be very, very nice, very generous of you. and verygoodshow.org. That's for Craig.
Yeah, go check that out too.
All right. So Martin Lawrence grew up. Originally I found that he grew up in I think it was Germany, and I was like, that doesn't seem right. But he grew up on an Air Force base. I think his father was in the military. He was one of 6 kids, and when his parents got divorced, he really did never hear from his father again. So essentially, he was raised by his mother for all intents and purposes. And when they got divorced, she moved him back here to the States, to a project in Maryland. He grew up in the projects. And the one thing I found most interesting about his childhood is, I mean, like they said, he was a kid who got into fights all the time, and he was always getting detentions. He was a class clown, that sort of thing. Classic comedian story, I guess. But he had a teacher who influenced him greatly. In the documentary, I watched one of those like A&E type documentaries, and she was in it. She went by the name Froggy Henderson, which I don't know if that's her birth name or not, but she was in it. And she was a teacher who kind of took Martin, I guess, under her wing a little bit, at least in the sense of, so he would make jokes in class and all this sort of shit, and like offensive jokes. He would curse and things like that. And so this Mrs. Henderson would tell him, hey, like, you're not supposed to joke about this topic. They didn't really get into, I imagine, the Holocaust or rape or whatever it would be. At that, some inappropriate topic would come up. And she said, you're not supposed to joke about things like that. And Martin really wanted to, obviously. And she said, well, if you can make me laugh about that subject, then you'll get out of detention. You don't have detention today. And inevitably, he always would make her laugh, make her break with whatever he was saying. And that stood out to me as something when I saw her saying that, I was like, that's what teachers should be doing.
Right.
Like, you shouldn't be there to be like the babysitter. You should be seeing something in each kid where it's like, hey, he's an artistic, creative kid. Maybe let's tap into that, rather than like, hey, you technically broke the rules. Let's slap you on the wrist for it.
You son of a bitch. Her birth name's Andrea, by the way.
I had a feeling it was not Froggy. I'm surprised that came up so quickly.
Apparently she ruled. So
she was awesome. She seemed pretty awesome. And I guess years later, he always said, like when he was leaving high school and everything, he said when he makes it big, he's going to buy her a car. And eventually he did.
That's
he showed up back at the high school. I think he did some kind of charity thing there or something. And he showed up and was like, Mrs. Henderson, I got you a car. So we'll get into essentially my ruling on Martin Lawrence is that he's a human being, because when I was going through different videos and interviews and things, I basically found that some people say he's a real scumbag that treated him like shit and thought he was too big for his britches when he got famous. And then there are other people that are like, he's great. He gave me all these opportunities. So my ruling is essentially that he's a human being who had some sort of power. You know what I mean? Like that would create enemies, but also people seem to really respect him as well.
Oh, yeah.
So Martin Lawrence left for the world of comedy, went out to Los Angeles. He started auditioning for things. Actually, he started in New York first. I believe that's where Star Search was. No, because Ed McMahon hosted. We'll fact check that. We'll get back to you next week on that, folks. But he basically got his, at least as far as appearances on TV and things like that, his start was essentially Star Search, where he lost in the second round, but he got an opportunity out of that. Some television producer saw him and basically said, do you want to audition for a TV show? So he auditioned for What's Happening Now. And that was only on for, I think, less than a year when he got that. But they said he was kind of a standout in a minor role. And like he started getting noticed from that. He got noticed. Also, I briefly mentioned Star Search, but I shouldn't go past that so quickly because it's different than like Sam Morril was on America's Got Talent, which even if you know who Sam Morril is, you might not know that because who gives a fuck, Like the world isn't paying attention to NBC or network television the way they were in the 80s. But in 1987, even if you're on Star Search for 5 minutes, that's a lot of eyeballs watching you. So that is a big deal. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like little spots on television like that were pretty huge back then.
Well, I mean, last week's episode, Joe Matarese was on there. So
that's right. America's Got Talent. Yeah, that's right.
One of those shows.
Yeah, that is where I noticed Joe Matarese. So you're right. I guess even today we'll find big stars in these shows. But yeah, so he was on What's Happening Now, and then he had a small role in Do the Right Thing. Spike Lee found him in this mix as well and gave him an opportunity that got him noticed. And during that same time, he got rejected from the Comedy Store 3 times, which I always wonder, like, Mitzi Shore has been very romanticized, like her process and everything.
Right.
And it's like, well, it seems like sometimes she was just wrong though also, you know?
I would say oftentimes.
Yeah, like there's no way she rejected Martin Lawrence 3 times to like show him a lesson or to like groom him. You know what I mean? Like she turned down Seinfeld. Like there are people she turned down where she just missed the boat on, I guess.
Yeah, that would be one of them, especially like we talked about briefly with Rogan. Like you don't crush that hard unless she, well, I don't know. She would also often pass people that sucked and piss off the whole room, and then the good comics would just get better.
Yeah, I guess that's my point is we kind of romanticize Mitzi Shore and say that was her process. She was this weird, wacky character. It's like, maybe sometimes she was just fucked up and made the wrong decision. That's also possible.
It sounds like she did a lot of drugs if you go back and listen to our episode on her.
It's what I hear. Well, I feel a lot of people may have at that time as well.
One of our first episodes, actually, Mitzi Shore.
Yeah, go back and listen to the Mitzi Shore ep. We talk about some of her hijinks. So my point is, even though he was rejected from the Comedy Store at that time, he started getting these things. He was in the Spike Lee movie. He was on national television. So he's getting these things where people are noticing him and those start to add up. So he did another role that he got, I believe, off of Do the Right Thing. I believe because of that role, he got Boomerang with Eddie Murphy. And that's where his career really started to skyrocket because then now we're in the early 90s. And Eddie Murphy recommends him to Russell Simmons. Martin Lawrence is one of the guys that Russell Simmons was looking at to host Def Jam. And Eddie Murphy's kind of stamp of approval got him that hosting job. And then also in 1992, he got the show Martin. And I was looking for like a juicy story. I wanted an interview or some crazy story of how Martin Lawrence got the show Martin. And he basically just said like his agent or some producer or someone came to him and said like, hey, we like you. Would you want to do a TV show? And he was like, yeah. And they were like, all right,
I guess.
So we'll get into Def Jam in a second also, but to give you kind of perspective on what Martin was, in 1992, the Fox network had only been around for a few years. Like it was very new, and it was still something that people didn't know I not even didn't know. I just assumed people thought it had no chance of competing with NBC, ABC, or CBS. But what that allowed Fox to do is give these kind of weird things a shot. So, they greenlit The Simpsons. They greenlit Married with Children, which is the type of sitcom that probably wouldn't have gotten on the other networks at that time. And Martin falls into that category as well, where it might appeal more to black audiences, or the way it was done where, they say it, the way it was described is like it combines a sitcom with sketch comedy. Essentially what that means is Martin Lawrence played other characters in the show. Like he played multiple characters at different times. So basically that's what they mean by that. But it was something that was unique and not really done a lot in TV at that time. And so having something like Fox is not dissimilar from having the internet now, where like we talk about Gillian Keeves all the time, where that's a sketch show that boggles my mind that no streaming service or network or anything has picked that up. But it also makes you wonder, is that a good thing? Is that better that they don't do that? Because they're kind of allowed to do what they want. So on Fox at that time, it kind of quickly became not the case where Fox was an established network. But in the early 90s, Fox was the type of place where they were like, yeah, fucking go for it. Do whatever you want, All
right. And it was back. It's back in the day when people got shows named after them, just their name.
Yeah. Basically, your act, and Martin Lawrence wasn't this way in his stand-up necessarily, but your act was centered around, like we talked about with Roseanne and Tim Allen, and even Seinfeld to a degree, where it's like, hey, I'll have this act that basically describes who I am, and off of that, I'll get a sitcom with my name attached to it.
Exactly. Not quite the reasoning for this one, or the correlation.
Not quite. No, but it was like Martin's kind of character as a person that I think did appeal to people at that time.
Definitely.
And so he also had, well, we'll get into it, but this is going on the same time as Def Jam. And we talked a lot in the Kings of Comedy episode, how influential that show was for comedy, where they started giving comedy like a hip hop feel. Like the coolest thing in music at that time was music like NWA. And what Russell Simmons did is give comedy that sort of feel, which I think was a big deal when you're coming off of an era where it's Seinfeld and Gary Shandling and Paul Reiser and these guys who aren't necessarily hip. There are a lot of things. They're very talented guys, but I don't know how if the word cool ever factors into their description.
Rich Voss.
Yes, Rich Voss. Greats like Rich. Well, he was on Def Jam. Don't forget.
I know he was the first white guy, I think, right?
He's pretty cool. But so Def Jam was also giving, kind of in the same way Martin made sitcoms feel a little, cooler or hipper. Def Jam was doing that for comedy, where it didn't really have that before. And Martin Lawrence was essentially the face of that at the time as the host. So he's on two, not just massive, but incredibly influential television shows at that time. So already we're talking about a guy who's had, in a short run in comedy, 5-6 years he's been in stand-up at this point. He's already had a major impact and influence, and he hasn't even gotten into movies yet, which is pretty wild.
Because he was a massive movie star for a little bit.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. But first, I think our first clip is Tracy Morgan, right?
Correct.
Did I miss anything before we get to him?
Nope, you got it all. I still don't get how you do that.
A useless but impressive memory. So this is Tracy Morgan with Ron Bennington talking about, I think this will put a little perspective on the impact that Martin had.
Where's the first time you got up doing stand-up? First time on stage?
I want to say 1968, about 4 a.m. when my mother's water broke.
And now appearing.
With the fan. That's what it was. That water broke, that's what it was. But the first time professionally, I want to say in 1990, 1991, Def Jam had came on. Something came over me and I just snapped. I had lost all my friends to the drug game. My dad died in 1987 of AIDS. And something snapped. And I just started doing comedy all around the hood. I was always funny, but I just started doing comedy though, at my boy's house in front of his friends. I'm seeing Def Jam, I'm seeing In Living Color, all these vehicles for urban stand-up was out there, so was a culture, and I fit right in. Then one day, my boy Raul, he took me to Def Jam because he was an intern over at with Russell Simmons, and me, him, and my brother was sitting up in the balconies, and Martin came out and did his thing.
You knew then. Well, it was like looking into your own future when you're looking at Martin.
Yeah.
That's
changed
like
my life.
Yeah, it's like a scene from a movie where suddenly a character realizes his own future.
Yeah. I knew I was going to be there.
Yeah.
Changed my kid's life.
Boss.
And Martin at that point had everything going. He had stand-up TV.
It's my OG.
Yeah.
I just saw him a couple of days ago at the FX up front, and I'm tearing not because I feel sad, because I'm happy.
Yeah.
Because I know this opportunity came about, and this man named Martin Lawrence gave me a shot, and the Brown Brothers over at Uptown Comedy Club in Harlem, they gave me a shot. But Martin, he let me eat at his table, and it wasn't because he liked me; it's because he thought I was funny. So he said, "Come eat at my table on my show," and he put me in front of this national audience, and he gave me an opportunity, and he told me things, man. And I'll never forget it, and I'll always be thankful to Martin Lawrence for that. He gave me an opportunity.
Now, the interesting thing about Tracy Morgan is that it's possible that none of that is true.
I've never.
That's why I love listening to Tracy Morgan, is because he's giving that emotional, and it's within the realm of possibility that 5 minutes later I'll be like, yeah, none of that happened.
I've never seen him get that serious.
Well, that's why the clip stood out to me, is just that he obviously cared a lot about that. And we'll play a little Chris Rock later. It's like, when you're particularly like young black stand-ups, the impact that Martin had on them seems to outweigh anything that honestly, the only guys I can think of that equal it would be Pryor and Eddie Murphy.
Yep, I was just going to say.
Where you've heard them talked about with that sort of reverence. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because even like Carlin inspired a lot of people. Seinfeld, Dave Attell. We could come up with a million names in comedy that like inspired people to get into comedy. But the interesting thing about black comics at that time that had a unique voice, like Pryor, Eddie, Martin, Chris Rock, things like that, is they weren't as prevalent on TV. You know, it seemed like every sitcom that was coming out at that time was a white stand-up comic telling his story, basically. But black comics didn't have that same, the equation was not the same. So like I said about Louis J. Gomez, where he was looking for something to relate to when he was a kid, yeah, he had no relation to Seinfeld. It didn't do anything for him. When he saw Martin, he's like, this is more of a backstory that I can understand and get behind. So when guys like Tracy Morgan and Chris Rock saw Martin Lawrence in the early 90s, they were like, fuck, that's something that I could do. So it's the type of influence that you don't hear, I feel like, white comics talked about with as much, because it's not as impactful to the people watching them. Does that make sense at all?
For sure. I mean, no one to that magnitude. It was almost like you said, with Pryor, who then handed it to Eddie, who then handed it to Martin, and no one forgets. Because I know, like,
and now, like we talked about, there's the Kings of Comedy, there's Dave Chappelle, there's a lot. I shouldn't say a million, but there's a lot more guys that you could point to as like, oh yeah, I could do that. Like if you're a black kid growing up in the projects, like Martin Lawrence was. You could point to all these guys and say, like, I mean, he did it, I could do it. But when Martin Lawrence was a kid, it was pretty much Richard Pryor, I guess.
Yeah, the only comics you ever really hear spoken like that now are Chappelle and Rogan.
Rogan in a different way, though. I don't think because of Rogan's stand-up career. I think it's more what he did for other stand-ups.
Well, that's what I meant, because he'll bring people on the road that might not necessarily be, quote, ready or whatever, right. Just to give him a shot because he thinks they're funny.
Yeah. It's funny. It's funny you said Rogan, Chappelle, because I would actually say Attell and maybe Colin Quinn. Like, those are the two guys I think of as having, because Colin Quinn, that New York Cellar table, I don't know if we would be talking about them the way that we do if it wasn't for Colin Quinn.
Well, for sure.
So he really influenced the generate. But anyways, you get my point, right?
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, even like the Chappelle corn maze shows or whatever the hell he was doing over the pandemic. He's just whatever he could do to help anyone else out.
Right.
That kind of thing.
So the other interesting thing I thought around this time is that Martin gets super famous. He's got these two gigantic television shows. But also, the thing that I found interesting is, and maybe you'll be able to think of some examples that I couldn't come up with, but it's pretty rare that you point to someone's best work as a stand-up to the album that came out or the special that came out after they got super famous.
Right.
But the stand-up special that everyone points to with Martin Lawrence is You So Crazy, which literally his first bit is about getting famous. So it's pretty rare that I love Bill Burr's special. I'm Sorry You Feel That Way. Mm-hmm. I think it's the one in black and white on Netflix. I think it's great. But you could also say Let It Go was better and You People Are All the Same. So you know what I mean? Like it's rare that a guy's best work comes after he would have essentially lost touch with the common man, you know?
Well, Rogan's specials are getting better and better.
Yeah, Rogan is a stand-up. Craig wants to make this he's Polish chucking me now. He wants to make this a Rogan episode.
No, definitely not. But we're talking about influence. I mean, no one has more influence in comedy, especially right now, than Joe Rogan. But it's funny. I didn't enjoy Rogan's stand-up. Me either.
His early stuff.
Me either.
And yeah, his last couple specials I did like. So yeah, that's a good one.
I agree. His Talking Monkeys in Space or whatever. I had no.
It didn't do anything for me. Yeah.
Nothing.
All right. What's next? Let's get back on track here.
Chris Rock on Martin's influence.
Yeah. So our first couple of clips here, as you can tell, is just guys kind of talking about. Like I said, I didn't know that. Maybe it's not interesting to you guys listening. Maybe you knew more than me about Martin Lawrence, but I just found it interesting the way a lot of these guys talk about his impact in comedy.
Martin, I normally didn't even watch opening guys, and I'm in backstage.
Is that a club?
Nah, it's at this place, the Airy Crown Theater in Chicago.
Chicago, yeah.
And I hear fucking, I think it's a fight or some shit. It's like, oh man, what's going on in the crowd? Like, fucking coming to the side of the stage, and people are fucking laughing harder than I've ever seen people laugh in my life. Like they're hurting themselves. Like.
Yeah.
Like people don't remember how fucking crazy this Martin shit was.
He was a beast.
That motherfucker was a beast.
Yeah.
I mean, he can still bring it. But I mean, you're talking.
No, he was a fucking monster.
Yeah, like Murphy. Like, unbelievable. And then I had to go on after that. And it's a bad set when you're still talking about the guy before you, 30 minutes in. Yeah, that Martin sure was funny.
It's like Martin said. Martin was talking about bitches earlier. The thing about bitches. You remember earlier when you were enjoying yourselves? I had a tag for one of his jokes, and here that tag is.
It was just brutal, sweat, just fucking. Yeah, I was done.
And you realized, I got to step it up.
Not only did I had to step it up, I had missed.
Was it black people? It was black people were at the show.
It was black people at the show.
Yeah.
And
prior to that, it was mostly white people or mixed, right?
It was mostly white people or mixed.
Who is interviewing him in this?
It's Neil Brennan and Moshe Kasher.
Oh my God. Let him speak. Don't guess where he's going. Holy shit.
I like Neil Brennan.
I do too, but they're trying to guess what he's going to say next. And he's like, no.
So it's interesting to hear them talk about, because this is how they would talk about Martin. This is how they talked about Bernie Mac when we were talking about him, where it's like the laugh they would get was like nothing. They don't even talk about the material. They talk about people's reaction, where they thought literally the room was going to collapse because people were losing their minds at what they were watching. So there's something very interesting about that, because to be fully honest, when I was going back and watching some of Martin's stand-up, it didn't do a ton for me. There's some stuff where I was like, that's funny, but it didn't have me howling. But there's something to be said for just as a performer, getting that kind of reaction is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I remember doing open mics, you think you're doing well because the few people that are there will laugh a little, right, and you're like, nice, I'm the fucking king. And then I remember my first showcase. I think it was Tony V, actually. It was a local Boston show, and he went up, and I went, "Oh fuck, I suck balls."
Yeah, that's another one where Tony V, if you had me, analyze his special, doesn't do a ton for me. He made me laugh. I've seen him open for Louis and Burr a couple times, and he's made me laugh. But like, I wouldn't say, oh, that's one of my favorite comics. But the way these Boston comics that would see him live consistently talk about him, it's unreal. The reactions he would get.
Yeah. Plus, he's just like a real good dude. But like, just the going from an open micer who just is like, oh, it's warm. I can talk into a mic and sit in like homeless people. And then you see like a real comic and you go, oh, that's what you're supposed to do.
Right. Yeah. And it's tough. It also takes a certain type of comedian, I feel like, to get that laugh. Like now that's how I've heard people talk about. And I was at his the recording of his special that's going to come out soon, Big J. Okerson. And there's something about like, it would be hard. The only guy that I've heard that's clean that I've heard gets that same type of reaction is Brian Regan, where he will fucking destroy. Like he's able to kill a room like that. But other than that, I feel like you do kind of have to be so dirty to be able to get that kind of reaction because it's such a shock. Like I think that comes from such a place of like, holy fuck, I can't believe they're saying this. You know?
Yeah, I would say recently I wouldn't say so much, but Gaffigan a few years ago, probably like a decade ago, would crush like that. And blanking on his name, Tennessee Kid. Why am I blanking on his name? Nate Bargatze. He kills like that too.
We have one more rock clip, right? Before I get too far ahead of myself. All right, let's hear that.
It's labeled new comedy.
Oh yeah, so this is what I was talking about. This is probably a less racist way of saying what I was trying to say earlier. Where I'm like, he influenced black kids, you know? This is Chris explaining that in a little more articulate fashion.
It's so weird because Martin like literally ushered in a new comedy. Like
a new type of comedy?
No, I won't even say a new type. I guess a new type of comedy.
God damn it.
Martin, you know, hey man, everything black in the last, 15, 20 years is because of Martin Lawrence.
You mean within the sort of the Def Jam?
Like literally most of the comedians, all the UPN, all the WB.
Right, interesting.
All, you know.
Yeah.
Everybody hates Chris, whatever. All this shit has... You gotta remember before
from Def Jam and Martin, the show Martin.
And
Def
Jam and Martin. You gotta realize too, it's not that there was no black shit before Martin. When Martin came on the air, I believe the Cosby Show and A Different World were still on.
Wow.
Okay, I know for a fact Different World was still on, but this was some other black shit.
Right.
You know what? Now listening back to it, it's not less racist. It's just I'm more comfortable listening to Chris say it than me.
I was just going to say, it coming out of his mouth, no one's going to question it.
Did I interrupt that? Was there more to it? My bad.
No, that was the end of it.
Yeah. It's fine. It's like, oh no, he's saying exactly what I said. He's just allowed to. But yeah, there is something where like what that culture, whether you want to call it hip hop culture or black culture, whatever, that didn't really exist in comedy. And like Pryor and Eddie kind of brought it there. You could even say a guy like Red Fox back in the day, a little bit, but a guy like Martin Lawrence, who was doing it from a cable stand-up perspective and a network television perspective. Because you got to remember, those are basically the two forms of television entertainment back then. Like now we have all different kinds of levels of how you can be entertained. Back then it was either HBO or a network, you know? So Martin was dominating both. And to, you know, young black kids at that time, that's the first time they were seeing something like that. So literally, as Chris Rock just said there, UPN, like all the sitcoms on there. I remember, like, I grew up watching the Wayans Brothers sitcom, the Steve Harvey Show. I'm trying to think. There are a couple others that I thought of, but they're slipping my mind. But those are all, even if they're not directly influenced, the reason they were able to exist is because of the success of Martin.
Yep, Blackish.
Well, but I would even put that different now. I guess what I'm saying is like, these stand-ups that are kind of able to give their perspective in the sitcom format, you know, which doesn't even exist anymore, really.
Yeah, I just made a poor joke. That was all.
Oh, all right.
It happens to the best of us.
Oh, that's the other thing I wanted to say too, is like part of the reason sitcoms don't work now is because of us. Like, especially just go watch an episode of the Blind Mike Project. Assholes like us should really take a lot of the blame because it's people who dissect everything. And it's like, oh, really? Would that happen? Things work out perfectly every time.
Yeah.
It's like people who dissect everything to that degree. Whereas in the 90s, it could just be like, you know, you weren't binge watching, so it didn't seem repetitive. You know, you could have a sitcom format. And there's part of me that misses that. I wish, you know, dorks like me didn't ruin it for everyone.
It's the fucking internet, man.
Yeah. All right. What's next?
You So Crazy.
Oh yeah. So this is just a little taste of that special that I mentioned.
Yep.
Yeah. So like I said, for this to come out when it did is pretty impressive because it's his basically signature work, and this is how he opens the special.
What's up? That's right. That's right. I hear the ladies hollering for me like I'm fine. Shit, y'all ain't gonna have me believing I'm fine in this motherfucker. I remember I couldn't get to women back in the day. Now I got women fucking me talking about, I don't know what it is about you. Wouldn't happen to be this $100 grand in my motherfucking pocket, would it? But thank y'all for coming out. This means a lot. I'm having fun. I'm even noticing white people are coming out now. You guys like me now, huh? Y'all never used to say shit to me. Just move out the way, nigger, move. Now white people are like, hey, Martin, you fucking go, boy.
So that's what I'm saying is it's very rare for a guy who's literally coming out and saying, I'm rich now and bitches want to fuck me. And that's like a signature special that people point to as fucking killer. You know what I mean? Because in comedy, you have to be relatable. You have to be self-deprecating, all that type of shit. And it takes a certain level of confidence to be able to pull off confidence. I don't know if that makes sense. But like, you have to have a certain attitude the way like Martin does there to be able to pull off like, I'm better than you people, you know?
Right.
Like, for example, like Chris D'Elia. If you go watch Chris D'Elia's comedy now, it's like I'm a hot guy and I fuck women, and it's like
I think he's avoiding that topic now.
Well, now, yes, I shouldn't say right now. A few years ago, but like when you hear that from a guy like Chris D'Elia, you're like, ugh, like gross. Why are you bragging to us?
Go back to like the German poison cake.
Adam Martin Lawrence, it feels like that's just how he would talk. Like he's not even being braggadocious, you know? Right. And there's an element of self-deprecation in there where he's like, a few years ago, you racist assholes never would have noticed me. So, all right, let's keep going.
This next one, actually, hold on. Let me, I have to, I don't know if there's something else in the order, but the next thing is his SNL appearance, the clips.
Yeah, we'll play that. Make sure I don't have any notes, because I made a lot of notes for this one.
You did,
but this is very interesting. Were you aware of this before?
No. Oh,
SNL stuff.
Bill Cosby slamming the Martin Show. We missed, I believe.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, so Cosby. I wish I could find it. I couldn't find him. I think he may have just said it in print. But Cosby basically said that, and he would say the most famous one is he criticized Eddie Murphy, and he would criticize Pryor, and he criticized Chris Rock, and all these young black, very successful comedians. Bill Cosby would trash them. I forget, did I put a quote there? Because there was a decent quote of how he described the sitcom Martin.
No, but they soon after won 2 and
oh yeah, that's my favorite part is that right after that they won the show Martin won 2 NAACP Image Awards.
Pretty good.
So I don't know if they were intentionally saying fuck you Cosby, but yeah, it's so interesting to me, and we'll do more of it whenever we do a Cosby episode, I'm sure. But it's so interesting to me that he felt the need to open his mouth on a lot of these guys, because it's like, well, they're talking about their perspective, and maybe it's because Cosby was being a phony that he felt the need. It was all projection, I guess, because there's an element of like, yeah, I get saying, hey, no, we should try to angle, or I should try to angle more for family values. We should try to instill those. We should use a sitcom to, kind of be a little more wholesome. And that's what Cosby did. So you did it, Bill, but you don't need to tell other people what they need to put on television, because Martin's upbringing was different than yours, and his perspective is different than yours. And what he wants to put out there and is interested in talking about is different than you. And Bill never got that through his head. And the very interesting thing to me is, like, if Cosby didn't do that, I guess you could say that maybe Me Too still would have got him, because that was a couple years later. So maybe at the same time as Weinstein and Kevin Spacey and these guys, they would have taken down Cosby. But you could make the argument that if Bill Cosby didn't criticize young black comedians, then we never would have gotten him. He never would have been in jail. We never would have come down on him for all these rapes, because Hannibal Buress never would have done that set.
Exactly.
So there's an argument to be made there that he really should have kept his fucking mouth shut. But anyways, yeah, I just thought it was funny that he criticized Martin, and then they won 2 NAACP awards right after that.
Love it.
All right. So now this SNL stuff I find very interesting.
Very.
So I knew he had a controversial monologue on SNL. I didn't know the extent to which it went. And also, I assumed he was touching on topics of like race or homosexuality or more controversial things, maybe religion at that time. So I'm surprised by what got him banned from NBC for a time. This is around the same time that Dice got banned from SNL, I believe.
Yeah, the ban hammers were out left and right, because now it's not even close to being like this. I mean, Louis did a monologue on SNL comparing having sex with young boys to eating a delicious Mounds bar.
Well, that's the other thing is, like, now SNL just somehow gets away with like, oh, well, no, but these people that do bits that are over the line, they're our guys. Like Louis at that time was their guy.
Right.
If he did that now, the pitchforks would be out. But,
yeah.
But yeah, the 90s, they were banning everyone. And this is first we'll hear what you heard on every rebroadcast of this episode. So like when I was a kid, I watched old SNLs on the E network, I think.
Yep.
Maybe Comedy Central as well, but definitely on E. They would rerun SNL all the time.
Condense them to an hour.
Yeah. And this is what you would hear if they played Martin Lawrence's episode.
Something else concerns me and it hurts. See, I'm single. I'm a single man. I don't have nobody. I'm looking for somebody. But I'm meeting a lot of women out there, and you got some beautiful women, but you got some out there that I gotta say something. Some of you are not washing your properly.
At this point in his monologue, Martin begins a commentary on what he considers the decline in standards of feminine hygiene in this country. Although we at Saturday Night Live take no stand on this issue one way or the other, network policy prevents us from rebroadcasting this portion of his remarks. In summary, Martin feels, or felt at the time, that the failure of many young women to bathe thoroughly is a serious problem that demands our attention. He explores this problem, citing numerous examples from his personal experience, and ends by proposing several imaginative solutions. It was a frank and lively presentation, and nearly cost us all our jobs. We now return to the conclusion of Martin's monologue.
Well, look here, y'all. We got a great show for you tonight, because I'm here. That's right.
And so that's how they rebroadcast it, because I think it went out over the airwaves live. Well, it did, because we have a transcript of it in a second. But by the way, what is that guy's name? That voice? I'm blanking on his name right now.
I've never heard that one.
He's the debate moderator in Billy Madison.
Oh, I don't know his name at all.
We're all now dumber from what we just heard.
Yeah.
He was very tight with Norm. I'm blanking. Everyone's gonna have it in the comments, but I can't think of his name right now. But anyways, because it was his voice, I was waiting for a punchline.
Was we all almost lost our jobs the joke?
No. It's because of like they would have been violating FCC law. So I think that was in all seriousness. That was not a joke.
Crazy.
But I was hearing his voice waiting for a punchline. And it never came. So if you're wondering, what could Martin have possibly said? We do have a gentleman who is reading the transcript of what happened.
See, I'm single, man. I don't have anybody. I'm looking for somebody, and I'm meeting a lot of women out there, and some beautiful women, but you got some out there that I gotta say something, some of you are not washing your ass properly, okay? Like, don't get me wrong, some of you, I'm sorry, because listen, I don't know what it is that a woman got to do to keep up the hygiene on the body. I know I'm watching douche commercials on television, and I'm wondering if some of you are reading the instructions, I don't think so, because I'm getting with some of these ladies smelling odors going, and wait a minute, girl, smell this. This you? Smell yourself, girl. Smell yourself. I tell a woman in a minute, douche. Some women don't like it when you tell them that, when you're straightforward with them, douche. I say, well, I don't give a damn what you do. Put a Tic Tac in your ass. Put a cert in your ass. I'm sorry, you got to wash properly. I'm a man. I like to kiss on women, I like to kiss all over their bodies. But if you're not clean in your proper areas, I can't. Kiss all over the places that I want to kiss. Some women will let you go down knowing they got a yeast infection. I'm sorry, come up with dough up on your damn lip. Got a bagel and a croissant on your lip. Anybody got any butter? I like jelly on mine. See,
so that's what you missed out on.
That's not even like bad.
It didn't seem that bad, although I know that there are certain things that, particularly in radio, I remember hearing this a lot. There were certain things that would get you kicked off, not curse words, but you couldn't reference like oral sex and things like that. Even if you did it like medically, like you weren't allowed to. So I'm guessing that's what it was. Although in the early 90s or mid 90s, I guess at this point, the country was also more just uptight about that stuff than we are now. So I don't know if it was maybe a mix of both, but it got Martin banned from NBC for a while until Warren Littlefield, who ran the network, sent him a message years later and said it was basically a misunderstanding, I guess. So I heard Martin kind of explain this. Do we have one more clip with this SNL stuff or no?
Nope.
Yeah, so I didn't include it because it was pretty short. But Martin basically explained it as like it was a misunderstanding because he alluded earlier in the monologue. He basically says like, I'm going to say some stuff that the censors are going to have to look out for. But I think because of that, they thought he was trying to like sabotage them, when in reality, he did run it by people or something like that. Regardless of what it was, years later, NBC apologized to him and acknowledged they were wrong. So he was allowed back on The Tonight Show and things like that. But he was banned from NBC for a while.
Yeah. And then on to another network.
Where are we going?
He unloaded on Fox.
Oh, yeah. So I thought this was funny, too. And maybe it goes to the differences in the network, because NBC, obviously, around a lot longer, much more established. But Martin Lawrence heard that for Seinfeld's 100th episode, they really rolled out the red carpet for him. And it was this big celebration and everything. So when the show Martin got to their 100th episode, he was like, boy, I wonder what they've got planned. And they sent to the, like the lot, wherever they're shooting the show, they sent one gift basket. And they were like, here you go. 100 episodes. Good job. And I guess Martin went into headquarters, went to whatever exec's office, and just started unloading on them. And they said that after that, all the cast got gift baskets.
Oh, good.
So it's, it was an interesting position that Martin was in, because he is now running this show. He is starring in movies like Bad Boys and like Life with Eddie Murphy and things like that. But he also made a movie. God damn it, I'm forgetting the name. Look up the movie that he directed and produced. A Thin Line Too Far. I'm gonna mess up the title, but he's under a ton of stress at this point, and this is where you start to see a change in Martin Lawrence. So basically,
there's three, but I'm assuming you're talking about the first one.
What is it?
A Thin Line Between Love and Hate.
Yes, A Thin Line Between Love and Hate. On that set, he had a breakdown where he had to be hospitalized. Basically, he lashed out and started freaking out, and it resulted in him having to take a trip to the hospital. So towards the end of Martin's run, mid-late 90s, where he's also starring in movies, things are starting to get to him. And this also probably contributed to a lot of why we haven't seen a ton of Martin Lawrence the last few years, at least prior to Bad Boys, the newest Bad Boys. But like at the beginning of Martin, he assembled the cast, like Tisha Campbell, Tommy, some of the other people in that cast were from either like just friends in comedy that he had, or from prior movies. Like I think Tisha Campbell was in House Party with Martin, and they developed a relationship there. And so he said, if I ever have a sitcom, I want you to play my wife or girlfriend or whatever. And he ended up coming through on that. And he would do things like that for his friends. And then by the end, whatever changed in Martin, a lot of people grew resentful. A lot of people had very different relationships with him. So this is kind of around the time that things started to change. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself before I start mentioning specifics. So where are we?
It's him doing stand-up talking about drugs.
Oh, well, this is him talking about his freak out on Ventura Boulevard, I believe, right?
Yeah, with the gun and everything.
Yeah. So Martin Lawrence, probably his most famous outburst is when he was running through an intersection on Ventura Boulevard with a gun. They said he looked like he had like mucus or something on his face. It looked like he had thrown up or was foaming at the mouth or something. And he was screaming, they're trying to kill me and they're out to get me and things like that. So this led to his arrest / hospitalization. And when I believe in Run Tell That is comedy special in 2002, I want to say, he addressed these charges.
So I go out in the street and I go to run across the street. I was trying to catch the light. I go to run across the street, and because how the light changed, I got caught in the middle of the street. Next thing I know, they got firemen, they got ambulance, they got the police, everybody out there with guns. All of them had guns out there just because I tried to run across the street. Nah, I'm fucking with y'all. I was higher than a motherfucker, y'all. I was high as shit. Oh, my fucking goodness. Oh, I was smoking that. Ew, wait. That shit had me on lunch box.
He really did get me, because when I listened to that, I was like, oh, is he going to make this like not a big deal? He's like, nah, I'm kidding. I'm fucking with you. I was high.
It was my fault. Hand up.
But I will say the interesting thing is like, he kind of makes it seem like he just smoked weed and did this.
Yeah, that was not weed behavior.
I've smoked weed in my life, and listen, maybe I just haven't smoked enough, but I've never gotten close to that. So I don't know what the deal is. I don't know what he was on. I don't know if part of it was that he was just kind of snapping with all the pressure he was under.
Could be.
So it might have been a multitude of things, but he did have this breakdown, and then he was arrested again for an incident in a nightclub. He, I don't know how it started, obviously, but he was arrested for punching a guy. So he had these episodes. I mentioned the incident on the movie set, and so he's obviously going through a tough time. He's dealing with depression and heavy drug use. People were starting to, like his family and cast members, everything were starting to get worried about him. And also, like, now he's developing the reputation of someone who's difficult to work with. So he's got all these things working against him. But meanwhile, he's still like a pretty huge movie star.
Right.
Which, I mean, I guess speaks to, how successful he was and how much of a draw he was. But like, it's also impressive just that he was able to, quell some of those concerns because they were all very public. Literally, he ran across a busy street with a gun. So literally extremely public.
And this was right around the time, I think, that Bad Boys came out, right? Early 2000s?
Definitely around the time. I don't know how close it was to that, but yeah.
And the little nugget about that movie is great.
I will. Yeah, that's very interesting, huh? I guess we could just do that now, folks. Did you know the original duo in Bad Boys, starring Will Smith and Martin Lawrence? You guys probably already guessed it. You're thinking, I mean, if Will Smith and Martin Lawrence weren't in it, you're probably Dana Carvey and John Lovitz. You'd be correct. I suspect they were going to go a very different route if that was the case, right?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I like how they go from them to two of the most popular people on the planet.
But also just like the vibe, Dana Carvey and John Lovitz versus very young, famous Will Smith and Martin Lawrence.
He can get away. It's a little too cold outside.
Yeah, so I found that to be interesting. But yeah, all right. Martin's having a lot of trouble. What are we dealing with now?
Sued for sexual harassment.
Yeah, so this is when things really started to take a darker turn. Although I didn't know that. It was obviously known enough that it came up in interviews years later and things like that. But I wasn't aware. Martin Lawrence had some sexual misconduct allegations.
I had no idea till you sent me this list.
Yeah, so co-star Tisha Campbell, who they obviously had a good relationship at the start of the show, like I mentioned, things started to get pretty weird. And there were always rumors of these two having a relationship. Both Martin and Tisha were married at the time, but a lot of people said that maybe there was something going on, extramaritally. I don't know. There were also kind of allegations that Martin would basically talk shit about Tisha's husband, and that Tisha's husband didn't care for that. There were rumors that sort of led to this lawsuit, but whatever it was led to Tisha Campbell very sparingly being in the last season of Martin, 5th season, I believe. And she wasn't in it a lot, and she said she wouldn't be in the final 2 episodes. She didn't want to appear in the final 2 episodes, and the only way they could get her to agree to do it was if she was never in the same scene as Martin. And the closest they got was her and Martin were on the phone together in the finale. So it's like split screen. They're in different places. Mm-hmm. So they just filmed it separately. Technically, they were in the same scene, but they weren't near each other. And I think also in the finale, they might have been in the same room once, but never got like physically near each other. So, and that was like one of her requests. She's like, that's the only way I'll do it.
So I just looked up, did Tisha Campbell win her lawsuit against Martin Lawrence? This is a little fun fact. I don't know if it was on the list.
Well, I know there was an NDA signed.
Yep, they both settled out of court, but this is from June 16th, 2022. So it was a few months ago.
Very recent.
There was a reunion for the show Martin on BET, and they were both on.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about that because that's why it's interesting. And my again, I'm sort of an expert on these topics, so I do have a ruling on this, and my ruling is that it seems like Martin started treating her like an asshole. It doesn't seem like there was necessarily violence. More verbal harassment is how it seemed. I'm really not sure. There were also, actually, I shouldn't say that because there were specific allegations. It came out, I think like 10 years ago or something. It came out long after the lawsuit, but it came out that she said that like during kissing scenes, he would actually like tongue kiss her and shit like that. That she was not into. And so there was physical stuff, at least alleged. So I don't know. It's weird because the reason I say I don't know what level of seriousness it was is because of the way it was talked about years later, particularly by Tisha Campbell. Is that our first clip?
Yep.
All right. So yeah, let's hear from Tisha.
Well, you know, I can't go into much detail about the past because there was a confidentiality agreement.
Okay.
And so the gag order says no.
Okay.
But what I can say is, to your question, I was actually kind of shocked. And so there were people in my ear saying, you know, just to be quiet, don't say anything. And then there were other people who were like, you need to pack back. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I was like, I took a day and I said, I'm gonna just hit him up. So I hit him up. He called me within a minute. It didn't even take him a minute to call me back. And so I was like, hey, and he was like, T. I said, yo, are we good?
Right.
And he was like, yeah, T, don't read into what it is. You know, there's a lot of people that's trying to bring up the past and trying to make it news today, but you know, T, we're good. I love you. I love your family. And I was like, okay. And he said, most people don't know that we've talked. And so when you go, if you look back, there was some pictures of us, and we had lunch last year, and most people were talking about a reboot. And for us, it wasn't about a reboot, it was about a reconnection. He reached out to me. And I got to break bread with my co-stars, and we got to talk about everything.
Oh, good.
Okay, and so I can't, again, I'm not gonna go into details because I wanna respect his privacy and I wanna respect mine.
Yeah.
But I will say by the end of it, it was nothing but laughter and healing. And I got a chance to experience that.
Those daytime talk shows clap at the oddest things. Like, yes, you're friends with your abuser. That's good.
Yeah, it was so serious. You were like, yeah, let's get lunch.
Yeah, so I don't know. That's. I think there was clearly a severing in the relationship. Like I said, she took a lot of shit for years because remember, this is the late 90s. So people were like, oh, you're a fucking liar. You're making this up. And even Martin in somewhat recent interviews would say like, it was nothing. It was like a misunderstanding basically. And, you know, like I said, some of the rumors were saying that her husband kind of forced the lawsuit. I think Martin at the time said it was like a contract negotiation, but by all accounts, it seemed like something happened. Like some shady shit went on. I don't know exactly what it was. But the allegations are what they are. And, you know, it seemed like Martin didn't behave very well, which does line up with how he was behaving in other ways at that time, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it is interesting also. It's like good for her that she was able to kind of get past that and forgive him, which I feel like isn't always allowed in society now. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, now it's,
like
now
there's
it's
probably a lot of pressure on her to not forgive him, I would think.
Yeah, nowadays you'll almost be more shunned than the abuser.
Right. Right. Which is very bizarre, but what's next?
2 weeks before the premiere of Blue Streak.
Yeah. So again, Martin's under a lot of stress. This was a little weird because he was trying to lose weight for Big Mama's house, which doesn't seem like he would need to, you know?
Well, then he'd probably get like he doesn't even need the fat suit.
I guess so. Yeah, you're probably right. But yeah, right before the premiere of Blue Streak, which that was probably my favorite Martin Lawrence performance.
I like
That's
Blue
the one
Streak.
I remember watching as a kid. Was Blue Streak. Very funny.
Me too. On TNT all the time.
And so right before that comes out, he's getting ready for the premiere of Big Mama's House, and it's a hot day in California. He puts on sweats and a knit cap to go jogging because, like I said, he's trying to lose weight. His body temperature gets up to 107 degrees, which they say is almost always fatal. And Martin slipped into a coma.
Right.
And the amazing thing is he essentially basically said he had to like relearn how to walk and talk and things like that. And he was back shooting Big Mama's House within 3 months of that recovery.
Yeah, 107 is crazy because I know if you have like a fever of 104, you got to get to the hospital ASAP.
Right. Yeah, 107, they say you usually die.
Right.
And he went into a coma. And, you know, who knows? I don't know what he was doing at that time. Is some of that, like, if you put on sweatpants in hot weather, do you automatically go into a coma? I don't know.
No, but
are there other things going on with your health at that time? I would assume so.
He's training like an amateur wrestler trying to cut weight before a match.
Yeah.
And
his body just probably was not ready for those elements.
Especially doing that in California, you're fucking stupid. Just jog with shorts. You'll be fine.
Yeah. And so all these things, now we're building a case here for why Martin Lawrence disappeared.
Right.
Because he's got these sexual lawsuits. He's running out in the street with a gun. He slipped into a coma. And yet, well, do we have any clips before I get to Big Mama's House?
This is Chappelle.
Okay, no. So, despite all of this, Big Mama's House obviously comes out after that. When Big Mama's House came out, his rate, like the amount that he would expect to get on a movie, went from $10 to $15 million.
God.
Martin Lawrence was making $15 million a film after the release of Big Mama's House. So it's weird. Like, you don't think of him on the level of, I'll use Will Smith as the example because it's probably the easiest, because when Bad Boys originally came out, I think Martin might have been the draw. Like, they were both on these huge sitcoms. But I think Martin, after being in movies with like Eddie Murphy and shit, I think people were more, and having an established stand-up career, I think people were more confident in going out to see Martin than they were in Will Smith at that time.
I just looked up his net worth and it stunned me. You have a guess?
It stunned you. Should I guess high or low? I'm going to say $60 million.
110 million.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
I'm telling you, he cashed in.
Good for him.
And Big Mama's House was a franchise, don't forget. So all those movies made a lot of money, which we'll get to some controversy behind that as well. But first, let's hear from Chappelle a little more on what the industry, and we heard when we did the Chappelle quitting Chappelle's show episode, we talked a lot about this, and Martin Lawrence was kind of the inspiration for Chappelle to say something fucked up happens when you get famous. Like, there's something fucked up going on in Hollywood. And so these are Chappelle's thoughts on that. With James Lipton.
When Martin Lawrence was in that chair, we talked about Blue Streak.
I love that.
He played a role in your life, I believe. How do you feel about him as a person, as an artist?
Martin Lawrence is the guy that showed everybody you can make it from D.C. to Hollywood. And I had a personal stake in his success. Every time he did something, it made me feel inspired and really good. And he was always real nice to me. He'd sit me down, "What's going on with you, baby boy? What? We'd talk about comedy, whatever." And, you know, when we did Blue Streak, we were promoting it, and Martin had a stroke. He almost died. And then after that, I saw him, and I was like, "Oh, my God, Martin, are you okay?" And he said, "I got the best sleep I ever got in my life." That's how tough he is. So let me ask you this. What is happening in Hollywood that a guy that tough will be on the street waving a gun, screaming, "They are trying to kill me"?
Yeah.
What's going on? Why is Dave Chappelle going to Africa? Why does Mariah Carey make a $100 million deal and take her clothes off on TRL? A weak person cannot get to sit here and talk to you. Ain't no weak people talking to you. So what is happening in Hollywood? Nobody knows. The worst thing to call somebody is crazy, is dismissive. I don't understand this person, so they're crazy. That's bullshit. These people are not crazy. They're strong people. Maybe the environment is a little sick.
I just love listening to him talk.
I know.
His thoughts on life I could listen to all day.
I forgot what we were doing for a second.
He gets you in a trance.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to hear his levels of influence by Martin Lawrence there, because he starts by saying Martin was the guy that showed everyone you could get from DC to Hollywood. Chappelle grew up in the same area. And so just that he took a lot of influence from. But also, he's obviously the guy, or, you know, one of the examples of people that got Chappelle scratching his head and saying, like, what is it that this industry does to people? Like, if I accept this $50 million from Comedy Central, what am I getting myself into? Like, what the fuck is going to happen to me?
Yeah, like, what percent of me are they going to actually own for the rest of my life?
Yeah, and so Martin breaking kind of helped lead Chappelle in that direction. And as he put it, like, why is a guy that is that mentally tough and that successful, why is the industry able to break him like that? So I think it's an interesting question, because there aren't a lot of guys that have, you know, longevity making $10 or $15 million. You know, look at Mike Myers might be, if you examine it, might have one of the most successful comedy careers. The guy has 3 franchise: Austin Powers, Wayne's World, and Shrek.
Oh, I mean, yeah, Shrek is like
insanely successful. Yeah. And all of a sudden he disappears. You don't see him in fucking anything anymore.
The last thing he was in was fucking the Queen movie as like the
no, he had some show. Didn't he have some show on Netflix that nobody watched? It doesn't sound like.
Oh, maybe the last movie he was in was the Queen movie, being because the Wayne's World Bohemian Rhapsody scene, saying no one will listen to that song. So it was fun.
Right. So yeah, people don't have like longevity at that level, and there has to be some reason why, and that's what Chappelle has kind of pointed out over the years. So I guess all we have left is one more controversy surrounding Big Mama's house, right?
We got Big Mama's house clip and then the dress.
Okay, well, let me hear the Big Mama's house clip first.
It's him in like a sit-down interview with somebody. It might be Lipton. I don't know.
Pretty much have a sense of who you are and are willing to, in a sense, say, if you're not willing to do it my way, then we're not willing to go your route. I think of the time that, was it Miramax that wanted to play around with one of your performances?
The NC-17 on my concert film, and I could have easily took the R, you know, and but they wanted me to compromise some material that I really thought I wanted the audience to really see and to know about me, and not to say they get the watered down version and go boom, and then see me live and go, well, we never saw that. I wanted them to know me for what I do in stand-up, because I'm not ashamed. I love what I do, and the way I am on stage is that's what I do.
So you
know, as someone with no backbone, that's a statement that I really respect and admire. Literally, all he had to do is make it an R rating, and he said it was easy. Like, I don't think that takes that much, but he's like, well, no, I just won't do it then. Like, I want to do my material the way I want to do it. I'm not going to change it because of your standards. Like, I'll change it because of my standards if I want to. And that's such a respectable thing to do at that time when there are limited options. But it was also, you know, influential. You see guys like Schultz. We mentioned Gillian Keeves earlier.
Yep.
You know, Morrill and Norm, these guys that can't get specials on Netflix. I know Sam Morrill has one now, but he couldn't get one for a long time. So it inspired all these guys, and obviously not just Martin Lawrence, but things like that, you know, pushback like that. And same with what Chappelle did to Comedy Central. Pushback like that has allowed people now to kind of see the light of like, well, I could just appeal to my fans. I don't need them for this. Like, there's nothing that's ever been more successful because of executives' notes. I shouldn't say that. I should say content notes. You know what I mean? Like they might be able to tell you, hey, you need like with Seinfeld, we talked where they were like, we don't really have a woman's voice on this show. And so they added Elaine. And I'm sure because of Elaine, it was a lot better than if it was just Jerry, Kramer, and George. Like Elaine was a great character.
Right.
So there are things like that I think they maybe do have a good grasp on. But the idea that like some stiff that works at HBO or whatever it was is going to come down and tell Martin Lawrence, you know, I think it would actually be funnier if you didn't use the F word here or didn't talk about insertion or whatever the fuck their notes were. And you know, Louis is the best example of that, meaning the TV show Louis, where like FX gave him literally free reign to do what they want. South Park guys, same way, where Comedy Central doesn't even know what's going on the air till the day of.
Right.
And they trust Matt and Trey to do whatever they want. And that's how you get the best content when you trust the creators, I think. And that's, that's what Martin Lawrence seemed to stand for a lot, which is why this next debate is kind of interesting, where there's a thing that's not really spoken about in mainstream media. And I can't figure out why that is. But there does seem, at least stereotypically, there seems to be, in the black community, they haven't necessarily embraced gay people and trans people and things of that nature the same way that maybe mainstream culture has. And so that has kind of caused an interesting debate over the years. And there are a couple different camps. And we heard Chappelle talk about this. Well, one of the things he said was they wanted to make him wear a dress in a sketch. They wanted him to play a woman or something. And he was like, well, they do this to black comics. They emasculate them by making them play a woman. And he used Martin Lawrence as an example. Tyler Perry, obviously. Chris Rock did it. I mean, there's a bunch of examples.
Adam Sandler, Black as Hell.
Yeah, I was going to say my counter argument to that would be pretty much everyone that's ever been on SNL.
Ever.
Will Ferrell, Dana Carvey, Chris Farley, David Spade, Adam Sandler, fucking Mike Myers. Mike Myers and Dana Carvey literally had signature characters as women.
Right.
So I don't think that the race angle is a legitimate argument. Cat Williams, I think, injected a funnier stance on it, certainly.
I've never seen this before, so I'm interested.
It's a grainy, it's like cell phone footage of Cat Williams doing stand-up, talking about guys like Martin Lawrence and Tyler Perry and the dress controversy.
That is different than the fact that Martin and Jamie are really going to do Sinead and Wanda as a movie. You see, because once you do Sinead and Wanda as a movie, and we already have Big Mama's House, and we know Brandon T. Jackson, that nigga showed up with his dress. He was ready to be in 1 and 2. You just start wondering how many niggas really need to wear a dress. And why is it so important? And they tell you shit like, but it's funny, is it? I'm saying I don't have any hatred in my heart for Tyler Perry because he works hard. But he is a drag queen. Let's be very honest. A drag queen is somebody who works in drag. Do you know who Medea is, sir? That's a nigga in that dress, sir. That's not nobody's grandmama. This nigga is only funny when he's playing a bitch.
So he's kind of shitting on Martin Lawrence, among others, for wearing a dress there. And the thing I would want to ask a guy like Chappelle, I mean, Cat Williams, just I don't necessarily agree with him, but his explanation's hilarious.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to question him on it. What I would like to ask a guy like Chappelle when he says like Martin's forced to is if you ask Martin, if you could bring back one character from Martin, who would it be? He says Shanae, which Cat Williams referenced there. And it seemed like he chose to be in Big Mama's house. So my question with Chappelle would be like, what's making you think that these guys are forced to do that? And also, why do you think it's divided down racial lines? Because it's like white men have done this shit too. Now, the relief for guys like Chappelle and Cat Williams are now, if a man puts on a dress, and he's not trans, I think he'll be jailed. I think if you're doing it for comedy's sake, I think he'd be put in prison.
Right. Right.
So you don't have to worry about it anymore being done for laughs because it's not going to happen.
Definitely not.
So, yeah, it's a weird debate that I never quite understood. But I think it comes from like a defensive place where Chappelle's looking at it from an angle of like, are they trying to fuck me here? You know what I mean? Because he kind of has that mindset. So I guess that's where it comes from. But I don't know how much validity it has in terms of the racism angle, you know?
Yeah, because as soon as you brought it up, I thought of only white people doing it. So
right. I mean, literally all of SNL. I'll expand it beyond SNL. All of sketch comedy.
Yeah. from
the 60s on, or maybe even before that, there have been men in dresses, and it's like, oh, that's hilarious. So yeah, I don't know exactly what the issue is, but
yeah, Will Ferrell.
Society has cured it.
Yeah, Will Ferrell playing Janet Reno.
That's the one I was thinking of when I said Will Ferrell. Yeah. But anyways, regardless, after the Big Mama's House series, Martin didn't have a lot. He was in Bad Boys, which was the highest grossing movie of 2020. You can grade that on a curve, but it did make over $100 million I think in its opening weekend. Oh, I forgot. It was before the pandemic, not after. For some reason, I kept thinking it was December of 2020 instead of January.
Yeah.
But it did make over $100 million opening weekend, which by any measure is pretty good.
Yep.
There is in production a Bad Boys 4. Yeah. I'd say cut your losses, gentlemen.
I'm pretty sure Martin Lawrence is directing that too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It'd be great if they had Chris Rock in it. Now I'm seeing it.
Yeah, I'll see it. You never know.
But point is, Martin Lawrence hasn't been quite as prevalent over the last decade or so. But his impact in comedy, I think we listed it quite a few times. We mentioned how great his impact is. So hopefully, maybe you guys didn't know that before, and now you do, and you'll look more into Martin Lawrence and Def Jam and the show Martin and things. Oh, that's another thing I meant to say. It's weird. Part of the reason you don't think of the show Martin as having the influence that it did is because of all these other shows that are rerun 10 million times a day. I mean, Seinfeld and Friends in particular. But, I mean, everybody loves Raymond, King of Queens, Home Improvement, Roseanne. All these shows from the 90s were rerun endlessly all over television. Frasier. You never saw Martin for some reason.
No.
And it was weird, because even in syndication, I said I would watch like the Steve Harvey Show and things like that. Martin never got on my radar. Like, it seems like Everybody Hates Chris almost had more of a life in reruns than Martin did. I don't know why that is. Maybe, you know what, now that I'm thinking of it, maybe because of some of Martin's controversies, it didn't get quite the rerun life. I don't know what that is, but it had over 100 episodes, so I don't understand. It certainly qualifies for syndication.
HBO Independent Productions seems to be who owns seasons 3 through 5, so maybe it's on HBO Max.
Oh, interesting. Go check it out, folks, if it is. But yeah, that's our Martin Lawrence tribute. We hope you enjoyed it, and always feel free to mention any suggestions to me. The listeners have good ideas for episodes all the time, so send them to me. I always think I'll remember. I've started writing them down, so I have a long list now. So if you send me something in the past, feel free to resend it to me, because maybe I forgot to write it down at the time. But the listeners always have good ideas, so feel free to do that. And the best place to reach out would be on Patreon. If you want to sign up for the Patreon, you can find that at blindmike.net. Please support the show if you would be so kind. And the best way in my mind to do that is Patreon. We also have merch in the merch store. But the easiest way, the way most of you probably will do it, is for free. Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Leave a 5-star review, subscribe, all that. All of that helps the show. And all of that is found at blindmike.net. So check that out. And also check out a very good show. That's where you can find Craig's podcast.
Yeah, I would love it. Come say hi. We need more people. That'd be tight.
Anything else?
That's it.
All right. We'll talk to you guys next time on Why Are You Laughing?